Okay, good morning and a warm welcome everyone to what is the first in a series of webinars run by the consulting team here at Talentful. This morning's session should last around 35 minutes, in which time we're hoping everyone will gain a fresh insight or at least some tangible challenges to their usual routine when it comes to technical sourcing. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce my able co-presenter, Ben Payton. Ben and I have worked together for almost 3 years. He's an excellent technical recruiter, someone who really lives by the core Talentful values of curiosity, of partnership, and moreover, he's a great person to work with. I feel like something of a warm-up act doing this, so I'll hand over to you, Ben. Can you give us a brief intro to your experience?
Absolutely. I think that's the nicest thing you've ever said to me, George. Thanks for that. Yeah, I'm Ben. I've been working in technical recruitment for the last six or so years, and I've been at Talentful for the last 4 of those. I guess I've always had a keen interest in technology and diverse methods of sourcing and creative sourcing. I think that has kind of come out in a few hackathons that I've done as well, and I've kind of really enjoyed getting my hands dirty with different sourcing methods. Over the last couple of years, I've worked at a variety of different companies, from startup SaaS businesses to gaming companies like Gram Games, to scaling fintechs, to a fashion company in Depop, and then kind of up to tech giants like Bloomberg, where there's like a different acronym for every department within the business. But yeah, I guess through that experience, I've been lucky enough to work in some super high growth companies where we hire at speed across the board, and then also kind of on some super niche roles in niche companies where we maybe look at one hire a month that will have massive impact on the business. But yeah, that's kind of a bit about me and my background.
Cool. Thanks for that, Ben. I guess by process of elimination, I'm George Morris. I look after Talentful's sub 100 person clients and manage the consulting recruiters and heads of talent working across those startup partnerships. I spend most of my time, and indeed have spent most of my working life, helping companies build awesome talent functions and providing really functional advisory around implementing talent strategy in high growth tech companies. If you have any questions on today's content, there are 2 things you can do. Number 1, there's a Q&A box on WebEx that allows you to type out questions. I'd implore everyone here to send questions as and when the light bulb above your head lights up, so that we can answer them potentially as we go through when they're most pertinent. The second thing you can do is send us an email or LinkedIn message following on from this session. So we love this stuff. It's who we are, and we're super keen to talk about talent and recruitment with anyone who's interested. Maybe you're a head of talent looking to hire. Maybe you're a recruiter looking to upskill during a quiet patch. Get in touch. So a brief explainer on who Talentful are. We're a 140 strong team of talent experts helping build the companies changing the world. We do that through end-to-end recruitment delivery, our culture matching platform Insightful, and our employer branding studio, who create high return photography, videography, and talent attraction content. Our consultants embed into high growth companies on a flexible basis and cement outstanding recruitment processes and experiences into the fabric of our clients. What constitutes outstanding is probably a good question. For us, it's the track record of successfully hiring companies through new fundraising cycles, taking them through the startup to scale up to enterprise narrative, and consistently getting great client feedback through our quarterly NPS results. And we're all over the place now. You can now find Talentful in London, Berlin, and San Francisco, working with seed-backed tech startups, the likes of Makers Academy, Attest, Series A companies, through to household names like Google DeepMind, King, and Revolut. Business time, here's what we're covering today. We're talking about where to find great technical talent. We're predominantly focusing on startups and scale-ups, so by default, these channels will typically be free. We can't overstate the value of diversifying away from your typical channels like LinkedIn, the path of the core sourcing stack, We'll talk a little bit about why that's important shortly. Something of a disclaimer, we're talking about one specific phase of Talentful's sourcing methodology today. And although we'll touch on facets of those phases peripheral to the find component, there won't be granular accounts of how we structure them. And they're patiently sat in the waiting room for another webinar another day. So watch this space. To start us off, here's the thing about finding talented culture ad candidates for your team. Outbound sourcing may seem like something of a numbers game. That is to say, the more emails you send on LinkedIn or wherever else, the more likely you are to pick up on the right candidate's radar at the right time. Sure, this works to an extent. It's something that we do in our clients, and scale of coverage is vital as your hiring efforts also scale. However, large-scale contact or spamming of any pool or channel is not so good for you. The reason for that is that every time you reach out to a candidate, you are consuming some of your company's brand equity. Targeted and thoughtful sourcing costs your brand less, maximizes response rates. That's why the most important part of the find phase that we use is looking to the channels where you give yourself the clearest understanding of who the candidate is. Those channels are often less saturated with recruiters. They provide better signals for candidate company alignment, predominantly because you can find out or infer more information on that candidate. That sentiment really translates through scale in my mind. I really love this graphic here on the right-hand side of this slide from Holloway. They have a great technical recruitment guide, which illustrates the typical utility of outbound sourcing through company stages. This stuff is super relevant, whoever you are and whatever scale your recruitment team is operating at. I'm going to hand over to Ben, who's going to start exploring some of the specifics around finding great technical candidates and launch into a bit of a discussion on that.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for that, George. I think the idea around diversifying your talent pools and your sourcing channels is really vital. I think using the same channels over and over again, you'll likely become stuck. There's millions of people on LinkedIn, I'm well aware of that. But if you're just looking for the same people over and over again, then you're not really kind of giving yourself the best chance of making a world-class hire. I think one of the best examples I've seen of that is a company called Thought Machine, which I'm sure a few people have heard of that are on this call. Thought Machine hire basically unlimited back-end engineers and have been for the last 18 to 24 months. They've had 3 or 4 recruiters working on the same role. So 3 or 4 recruiters working on a back-end Python engineer, for example, for 18 to 24 months. You're soon going to start just messaging the same people over and over again. And as you said, the brand equity that you lose with that is kind of astronomical, really. Further to that point, not everyone is on LinkedIn. There are a lot of people on it, but not everyone is. So it's really important to find out where the people are that you haven't already reached out to. One of the easiest ways to do that is to kind of speak to your team, find out where they'd go if they were to look for a job, and then start sourcing on the back of that. I've listed a few channels here, and we'll go into a bit more depth on a few of them. So what I can do is start by talking a bit about the Google, and the Google logo is there because I wanted to talk about Google X-ray searching. Google X-ray searching is amazing because you can be really, really specific in what you look for. It's relatively easy to do. I'm not going to go into depth now, but there's lots of step-by-step guides online that you can follow. You can look kind of across different websites as well. So you can look at Stack Overflow profiles, you can look at GitHub profiles, you can even look at LinkedIn profiles by X-ray searching. And the X-ray search will actually bring up a different set of results in different order to the search that you would do on LinkedIn, even if you use exactly the same criteria or exactly the same Boolean, which is really interesting and an easy way for you to start. The second logo at the bottom there is AngelList. AngelList is a freemium website. You can pay for an extra service, but I don't really think you need to. On AngelList, you can set up bi-daily notifications for new candidates. And the candidates tend to have really relevant experience for startups. They tend to either be from big companies wanting to move to startups or in startups looking to move. One useful hint I'd give when looking at AngelList is rather than having your desired location just as London or just as your location, open it up a bit. You can actually search for European candidates. You can search for Western European candidates. So by doing that, you're really giving yourself kind of the maximum opportunity possible to attract the right people. Slack communities, there's so many different Slack communities out there, and they tend to be relatively focused on skill sets, which is useful. Most of those Slack communities as well will have a job section, so it's worth asking your team what Slack communities they're part of, and who are the standout members of that group. And it can be as easy as looking over their shoulder and kind of noting down a few names and then going to reach out to them either via email or on different platforms. And Twitter as well at the bottom, a relatively simple platform to search candidates on. A really easy way of using Twitter is literally seeing who follows your company, and then also seeing who follows your engineers. And by doing that, you're instantly seeing a talent pool of kind of prospective candidates, which is awesome. So the ones I've chosen to speak in a bit more detail about are Meetup, which is at the top there, and also GitHub. And I would highly recommend these two as kind of a starting point for your creative sourcing journey. Meetup can be amazing. With a quick Google search, you can bring up hundreds of meetups that are really, really relevant for what your company is doing, and in particular what the role is that you're hiring for. As an example, if you're looking for a world-class DevOps engineer that's going to have Terraform experience, which is quite common nowadays, rather than just looking at a DevOps London meetup, why don't you go in depth and say, is there a London Terraform meetup? Is there a London HashiCorp meetup? And the likelihood is that there is. Well, I know that there are. And then on the back of that, what you can do is go through the attendees list, which is, again, really simple to do. You can even cross-reference them on LinkedIn to see exactly what job they're doing, and kind of if they are open to opportunities or not. Another way of using Meetup is looking at meetups and seeing who's hosting and who's speaking at them. And the likelihood is that the companies hosting those meetups will have people that your company would be interested in speaking to. They'll have similar skill sets. The best thing about Meetup in my eyes is that the candidates that you generally find on there are really passionate about learning and developing and want to learn or develop, and they're being proactive about it, which is really great, and not really something you can see from a CV. So by using Meetup, you're kind of getting the right kind of people that you want. Either that, or you're getting people that want a few free beers and some free pizza, which, yeah, may be equally as important. And then I guess the last point on Meetup, it really gives you a solid topic of conversation when you're messaging them. And I'll speak a little bit later about the importance of that. But by using Meetup, you instantly have a topic that they're really interested in that you can then kind of further develop and build a message around. The second one, GitHub. GitHub's amazing for sourcing technical candidates. I can't say that enough. If you're not using it already, please use it. It's great. One of the best things about it is you can be framework specific with your search rather than just technology specific. So you can really go into depth on kind of React, Angular, Node, whatever the framework is. You can kind of go really in depth there. There's guides online on how to use GitHub in depth, which are great. But what I would recommend off the top of my head are using trending repositories, searching by topic, using the advanced search function, and also this is the most simple one, but to see who's actually following your company account. Most companies or most engineering teams will have an open source GitHub account, so have a look at that, see who's looking at it. Maybe there's people that have forked it and then kind of made their own edits on top of that, which is such a good way to find candidates that are really interested in your company and the technology that you're using. And also by looking at Google, you can kind of just look at how to get someone's GitHub email, how to get someone's email address from GitHub, and it's a really easy guide to get their personal email address, which you can then message them, which is great. I guess what I would say is that none of these methods alone are a golden bullet, would you say? Focusing on one of them alone won't make a huge difference to your pipeline, nor will focusing on it for 30 minutes and then forgetting about it, or playing around with it for an hour and then forgetting about it. The secret here is to try and diversify your sourcing channels as much as you can. Try and commit to 30 minutes to 60 minutes a day where you can look at a different channel, you can start to understand it, and you can kind of become a little bit of an expert in it yourself and know exactly what you're looking for. And by doing that, you'll ensure that you're never over reliant on any single channel, which is really important. I guess there's also a point to make around a different feel to messaging, and I think George will go into this in a bit more depth later. But when you're messaging people via these sources, it's super personal, and the way it's personal is because you're messaging them because you've looked for them specifically. You're not they're not one of 1,000 people that you've found from putting in front-end engineer onto LinkedIn and pressing search. You're speaking to them for a reason, and the reason is that you know that they specifically can add value to your business. And having that purpose to a message really resonates with people. It makes you stand out from the typical recruiter spammy crowd, and it can have like a drastic improvement on your response rate, which is really cool.
Yeah, exactly. And I think just to add to that, it ties into the comments before around, not wanting to jump into the kind of engaging piece. So we're purely today talking about how to find really relevant people to your company and to your technical teams. But it's really important to think about the dynamic of who you're reaching out to and what kind of space you're in. Like this is not a recruiter space, right, Ben? It's a space that is around, your technical contributions. And as such, a really high volume approach doesn't work, but it gives you a lot of information through which to craft a really compelling, really great outreach to people who are talking about the kinds of things that resonate and are pertinent to your team. So really, really interesting. I think maybe this is a question for you, Ben. One of the things that always happens when we run internal trainings for in-house recruiters on GitHub sourcing is people ask this question around like, how do you even get started? Like, it seems quite overwhelming to jump into GitHub, into this technical space and say, okay, this is my first port of call, or like this is how I go about finding people in the first instance. So what would you say are kind of the kind of metaphorical low-hanging fruit in terms of finding people initially if you've never jumped into GitHub before?
Good question. I think the first point that I'd look at is creating an account. Obviously, you just create an account on there. You can call yourself a recruiter. It's fine. People won't be that scared by it. The easiest way that I find sourcing on there is by looking at which repos are trending. And that can be done as easily as putting in github.com/trending. And you will literally see all of the top trending technology repositories. You can then filter that by specific technologies. So if you're looking for PHP, for example, you can see in it for today, for this week, for this month, what the top repos are. And you can just see who's actually contributing to them and the contributions they're making. And that's a really, really simple way of doing it, but it can be really effective. And then I know we're not going into depth about the engagement piece, but by messaging someone saying, hey, I've seen your repository on GitHub is trending, it looks really interesting, and show it to your team and see what they think. That's a really, really easy, warm approach to get new candidates.
Yeah, and maybe another question, Ben, in terms of your experience, one of the things that I know, for example, the Talentful team are sometimes split on when we have our technical recruitment meetings or squad meetings or what have you, is this point around whether you reach out to someone via the email that you can pull from GitHub, or whether you go to another platform and just reference the content that they've put up on GitHub and open source. So do you have a strong feeling either way, or a leaning either way on that?
Yeah, I think if you want to stand out from the crowd, an email goes a long way in doing that. I think going on LinkedIn and doing it is relatively easy, but ultimately, if you kind of find these people and put all the effort in to find them and then send them like a blanket template email or in-mail, sorry, then it's not really going to have the impact that you want, right? I think find their email address. It's really simple to do. Google shows you exactly how to do it if you just literally do a quick Google search. And by finding their email, you can then send them a really, really intricate message that will stand out from the crowd.
Mm. And are there any specific things? I know we don't want to jump into the engage piece too much, but are there any specific things that you think really really compels your audience in any of these channels to press reply?
That's a good question. I think actually seeing what they do and
Mm.
reading about them a little bit more, rather than just seeing a name, cross-referencing, and then emailing, but actually going to depth. If it's on Meetup, for example, read about what the Meetup's actually about. Don't just spam people. This is an easy way to source candidates, but the engagement is an equally important bit. So find out exactly what they've been doing and make it compelling and targeted towards them as an individual rather than anything else.
Good stuff.
So we'll move on to talent pooling quickly as well. So I don't know how many people talent pool. I'm certainly guilty occasionally of time to time of not kind of setting time aside for this. But talent pooling is basically creating a short list of candidates that are not currently being considered for a role. So they're not applicants. Most ATSs have talent pooling functions. If not, you can create a job on an ATS and just call it talent pool and then be a bit more specific. Or if you're still a relatively early stage startup, I would recommend spreadsheets. They're great at the start because they're super flexible. The downside of a spreadsheet is not amazingly scalable, as I'm sure many people know. But the purpose basically of talent pooling is if you know who you are and what you want, why would you not build the pools of people that you actually want to join your mission? If you do that, then when you need to pull a trigger, you can do it really, really quickly. That will reduce your time to hire massively. It makes cost savings. It impresses investors as well right now, who, especially at the minute, are really looking for savings wherever they can. I've put here on the slide a few examples of pools. We have rejected offers. That's a really easy way to start. It's a super quick win. Look at who's rejected offers in the last year, 2 years, 3 years, get them all into a compiled list, and then start to kind of create a strategy of engagement around them. People that have failed on sites as well, particularly if they've been rejected for lacking experience a couple of years ago, get them in the list. The way most internal recruitment teams work that I've seen is that they just someone will reject an offer, they'll put it on the ATS as rejected offer, and they won't even think about that person again unless they come up on a LinkedIn search in 2 years' time, which is pretty rare. Exactly the same with the failed on sites. If they're lacking experience, put them in a pool, don't just forget about them. And previous interns and previous work experience as well. If people have interned or done work experience at your company, if they've impressed you, keep record of it, keep them in a talent pool, keep them warm, ideally for the next like 10, 15 years if you're going to be at the company for that long, because that person's going to gain experience and having interned with you is going to be a connection that you have and leverage over any other company out there. There's also these slightly longer term talent pools. So looking around diversity initiatives, I think particularly now there are people with slightly more downtime within recruitment in certain companies, looking at ways that you can, looking at pools of talent from certain diversity initiatives can be really, really useful now. And again, give you a really quick pull on a trigger as and when you need to kind of put the trigger on hiring again. The top 1%, I think that's like the top tier candidates, the golden bullet candidates. That's a list of people that you know if they respond, they're going to get the job. And there's going to be a lot of people out there for each one of those. And then for future roles as well, I think the likelihood of you only hiring 1 or 2 roles is pretty slim. Even if you're not hiring for a role right now, rather than just seeing an amazing candidate on LinkedIn and thinking, oh, if only we were hiring that right now, and then forgetting about it, put them in a pool, keep tabs on them for the future. And one that I've not actually added to there is unresponsive candidates. So people that you've messaged that have not yet responded, keep them in pools for the foreseeable future. It makes it really easy to retarget people in a month, 2 months, 3 months. And that pool could even be like a project on LinkedIn Recruiter, right? That doesn't necessarily have to be a separate thing. But the amount of people I've seen message like hundreds of candidates over a month or so, and then when it comes to response rates, they have maybe 10 or 15 responses, but the rest of the people they've just completely forgotten about, and that's not ideal. And I guess there's a question of pooling around GDPR at the minute. It's not really an issue for it as long as the data you're collecting is publicly available data. Obviously, if it's private things from the rejected offers, don't keep them, but you can keep the people's names, email addresses, and kind of create an engagement strategy around that. And I guess my final point on the pooling is the longer and higher quality of a list you can create in your pool, the easier it will be to generate pipeline when you start hiring again, and the easier it will be then for leadership to be able to forecast hires. And I know it's something that on a day-to-day basis, it's really hard to kind of keep on top of and to have the willpower to continually build pools, but 100% it's worth it.
I think that's especially important at the moment. Something that is potentially going to change over the course of the next 6 to 12 months is the lens through which C-suite and board level folks are viewing recruitment. And it's likely that there's going to be a tapering in terms of the expectations on volume of hiring. So with that comes this real need to know that when we go to market to hire somebody, we're going to be hiring them quickly. And this pooling stuff is totally aligned to that paradigm of thought. So I think it's even more important given the current market environment. One of the things that's potentially interesting to talk about, Ben, is when we look at these quick wins in terms of rejected offers and failed on-sites, what do you think practically or really tangibly folks who are maybe hiring at the moment, maybe they've got a little bit less on at the moment, how do you think people can kind of look after those pools? It's oftentimes the case that we turn up at a business and there's a pool of rejected offers or failed on-sites, but there isn't a regular cadence with which anybody owns or anyone is accountable to circling back on that group of people. So do you have any opinions on what that should look like, or what best practice would look like around jumping back into those pools and kind of knowing when to circle back with them, if that makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the initial outreach should be warm with these people. You should know them already from your time with them, and as a company, you kind of have spent a lot of time with them in the interview process. It can either come from a recruiter, it can come from a hiring manager, it can come from a CTO. It doesn't really matter. But the idea is that you're not messaging them about a job in particular. You're just messaging for a catch up. You're seeing how they are, seeing how they're doing, basically saying that you want to kind of keep in touch with them over the next kind of couple of years, basically, just to see how it goes, and kind of if and when you need to, then you can really kind of pull the trigger and go for them. I don't think it's the case of you've not spoken to them for 2 years and you're suddenly going to send them an outreach to say, we've got a job that I think you'll be perfect for. I think it's more saying, like, how are you doing? What are you up to at the moment? What kind of work are you doing? If you're free for a coffee when the whole lockdown thing's over, that'd be great. If you're free for a hangout, just kind of reconnect with people, really.
One of the things that we increasingly see in startup and scale-up clients, and also businesses externally from Talentful setup on the market, is this idea of having a talent pool option on the ATS or on the careers site, so that folks maybe don't see a specific role for them in that moment, but they're hyper engaged with the brand, and as and when something becomes available, they want to know about it. Have you seen any of the clients that you've worked with through Talentful or otherwise, Ben, see a lot of success through that?
Yeah, absolutely. I can't recommend doing that anymore. I think particularly some of the work we did at Depop, which are a relatively fast-growing fashion tech company. But there was people that we'd interview there, or that would apply on the website, and we wouldn't have a job for them. And by creating a section where they can actually just put their details in and we keep in touch with them anyway, it allowed us to make some hires that we were planning in like 6-12 months time. And it kind of really fast forwarded that process, which was amazing. And actually our engagement strategy around that was for the CTO to act as kind of a mentor to these people, reach out to them, give them advice on kind of what they're doing at the moment, their careers, etc. And then naturally that kind of led to when we had the opening, that person kind of fitted in there, and we'd already been kind of working with them and kind of giving them some training advice over the last like 3 to 6 months, which was a really good win.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, if you're a brand that faces consumers where people maybe have an affinity for products, it's a particularly useful form of engaging people, I suppose, to get people to pull. So Depop is an amazing brand for that kind of strategy.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so I guess in terms of a summary on what we've covered, there is a real point here around how your sourcing channels can be a point of differentiation relative to your competitors' reach outs, relative to non-competitors' reach outs who are competing for the same talent. If you're communicating with someone through a channel, say GitHub, like Ben spoke about, that maybe they haven't been reached out to before, there's a point of difference just in how you're thinking about hiring for your team. And that in and of itself can be a selling point on technical roles. As I said earlier, it's super important, particularly for startups and scale-ups, that you don't burn through your brand equity with abundance. You have this more thoughtful, more targeted approach to who you're reaching out to, and spend a bit of time to know the space where your target audience hangs out online, understand the profile of who they are, and then sparingly reach out to those people with a hyper resonant message, which is something, as we said, we're not going into a ton of detail today, but we will at some juncture in the future. As Ben has said previously, it's really important to utilize different sourcing methods to target specific profiles of candidates and stand out from the crowd. And creating a really long or deep, high quality talent pool will make it much easier to generate pipeline for future hires. It makes it much easier to forecast hires, and it will lower your time to hire when things pick up if they're quiet at the moment. So as we said, at the moment, the market is really wild. It's very strange out there. But the likely movement of what's happening from a hiring perspective in the tech space is going to be that there's more impetus put on the predictability of your hiring. There's more impetus put on the costs of your hiring. And so by extension, reducing that time to hire, making that forecast more precise, or ability to forecast more precise, is going to be of enormous utility, not just to your hiring metrics and to your stakeholders, but actually also to a lot of very business critical things like your burn rate. So it's really important that people from a talent perspective are thinking about these things at the moment, when there's potentially a little bit more time to think about them and not everybody's hiring on all cylinders. So that's pretty much us for this morning. As I said at the start of this session, we're super happy to provide support beyond today. I hope everyone's gained something. If you're interested in learning more about Talentful, our website is an obvious but probably quite useful first port of call. You can have a look at case studies of the partnerships and clients that we've worked with. Maybe you can take the insightful culture matching quiz and find your personality archetype. Our next webinar is actually next week. Details are on the website, and there's a link in this doc which will be sent out to attendees afterwards. It's being led by Evie from our San Francisco office, so it's a little bit later in the day, but a hugely interesting session, draws upon a ton of experience working across startups, scale-ups, and also enterprise in the form of Google DeepMind. So I definitely recommend signing up for that session next week. Otherwise, don't hesitate to reach out to us directly. Both Ben and I will be checking our LinkedIns. We've added our emails to the start of this deck. So if you have specific questions that you'd like to speak to us about directly, or just meet for coffee, learn more about Talentful, then of course we're happy to do that. There's a couple of questions that have come through. Ben, you're still on and you're able to answer questions too?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want me to take the first one?
Yeah, so the first question is, where are the most responsive people of those channels that we spoke about? Where's the highest response rate from? And then I guess by way of a follow-up question, is GitHub good at getting responses, for example? Are people expecting to be contacted by recruiters on that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good question. I think GitHub, in my experience, is probably the most responsive of those channels. One thing to mention about GitHub, I personally don't message people within GitHub. What I'll do is find their email address and then reference their GitHub profile or some of the work they've done in a reach out to them. Typically, that has a really good response rate in comparison to other channels.
Yeah, absolutely. And please keep sending these questions in if you have them. The next question on here is, how can recruiters leverage hiring managers who have profiles on GitHub or any of the other platforms? So that's a really good question. And if you look at the deck and you go back to the Holloway chart earlier in the presentation, you'll see this point around who looks after the outbound headhunting in a really early stage business. Lots of the seed through Series A stage companies that we work with in Talentful startups are having hiring managers reach out themselves, which is totally fine. If you want to leverage someone's profile directly by them reaching out, that's great. But it's also, in my experience, been a really useful tool to reference a hiring manager's profile if they've got commits or they're driving the work in specific repos on GitHub, and for candidates to be able to see for themselves, these are smart people, to see for themselves the kind of work that the team are working on internally. And that doesn't just have to be hiring managers with profiles on GitHub. You can reference the work that your company or your technical teams within the company are doing if you're in a position where you can open source the work that you're doing. So there's a couple of different ways you can leverage your hiring managers' profiles on GitHub. On other platforms, there's a ton of ways to do this. I mean, in really early stage companies, again, one of the things that I know myself and some other folks working with early stage businesses, Talentful have had success with, is to invite people in and meet those hiring managers in like opening evenings or hackathons or what have you, and to reference those events when you're reaching out through other platforms. So there's some good ideas there, I suppose, in terms of how you can potentially start doing that practically. Another question here is, how would you find out where your target audience are hanging out if it's an area you've not recruited for before? That is such a good question. So how would you find out where your target audience are hanging out if it's an area you've not recruited for before? The first port of call really is to be speaking with your existing engineering team, or if it's not engineering, the area of the business that you're hiring into. So one of the things I always talk to the Talentful startups team about, and I know this is ubiquitous across all of our verticals at Talentful, is as a technical recruiter, most of your time should be spent with the engineering team. Most of your time should be sat there with those folks, understanding what they do, because that is the biggest feeder into being able to present that brand, that engineering brand, to the market. So if it's an area you haven't recruited to before, I'd really recommend sitting down with your engineering team and working out, what their profiles look like, what they're able to share in terms of like where they go on, say, Reddit or Quora or GitHub or whatever else. Would you add anything to that, Ben?
No, I think you're spot on there. Yeah, I think speaking to people is the best way of finding that out.
There's a follow-up question here on GDPR. So the question is, hi guys, how does this form of sourcing fit in with GDPR? Ben, you touched on GDPR a little bit previously. Do you want to jump into that one?
Yeah, I think all of these sourcing methods are ultimately using publicly available data. There's nothing in particular private about everything that you're doing. So in general, there's no problem at all with the GDPR stuff. The only area to be kind of cautious is when you're creating talent pools from past candidates. Maybe you kind of engage with them pre-GDPR, etc. If that is the case, I would recommend maybe dropping them an email just to say, FYI, we still have your details, which should have happened anyway, and they should have been okay with it. But yeah, I would just kind of let them know that you still have their details in that case.
Great. And the final question here is, are Meetup and GitHub free, and can you contact them on there, or do you need to find email addresses? So the short answer is yes, they are both free. Meetup and GitHub don't require any payment. There's obviously a slightly different dynamic to how you reach out to people through both of those different channels. On Meetup, it's typically a good point of reference to reach out somewhere else. Although my understanding is you can still reach out directly through Meetup, right, Ben?
Yes, you can message people on Meetup. Yeah.
Yeah. And for GitHub, you just need to sign up for an account, and then you are free to party and run around and have a look at the various different avenues that Ben has highlighted just there. Typically, as Ben said before, it's a good idea to reach out to candidates on GitHub via their email address. There are a few different kind of hacks, I suppose, that you can use to find those email addresses on GitHub. They're not all visible on the front end of the platform, but you can use the GitHub API to find emails, and there's a couple of hacks to help you do that. It's something that we would typically train our recruiters in at Talentful, but if you're interested in more details on that, then let me know. It's not something that you can necessarily provide a walkthrough on in a webinar format, but happy to talk about it. So yeah, I think that's all our questions. Great, that's us. So thanks so much for everybody's time. As we said, if you need any support beyond today, feel free to reach out to Ben and I. Feel free to contact us through our website. Obviously, we will send out this recording to people within a few days. You'll have a view on the deck, but I hope everybody gained something useful this morning. And thank you so much for coming. Cheers, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Cheers.